In today's video, here are the top 10 things that I flat out detested after spending a week evaluating the GWM Canon Alpha plug-in hybrid. And I'm doing this video for you for 3 reasons. Number one, because I'm also doing the top 10 things I loved about it. And if you're seriously in the market, therefore, you can get the full yin and the full yang experience just by watching 2 videos that lob at exactly the same time. Number 2, you don't do videos like this one if you're getting paid off, pretty clearly. And I'm not being paid off to do this. I just think this vehicle is so revolutionary and such a departure from the utes that we are familiar with that it's worthy of coverage. And it's certainly a philosophically different, compelling alternative to Ranger and Hilux. So here we are. And number 3, obviously, is that when you've been doing this for as long as me, you could drive a BMW M5 or an S-Class or any vehicle of that nature, GT3 Porsche, and come up with 10 things that you hate. And this is really important, right? Because if you're a buyer, you need to do 2 things. You need to identify the things about a vehicle that you love, and you need to really love them. Like, you need to love them long time, dude. Not just for 3 weeks, because you're going to own the vehicle for a lot longer than that. But you also have to identify the things that you dislike intensely and whether or not you can live with them. So are the good things compelling enough, and are the bad things tolerable enough? It's kind of like being married, isn't it? You have to really, really love the things that you really, really love about your wife or your husband, whatever. And then you have to tolerate the things that you really can't stand about their character, because you will be intimate with that as well, won't you? And as someone who's had 6 wives, I think I'm just a beacon of tolerance by now. That's pretty clear. Anyway, let us get on to these hate-filled 10 things to do with the plug-in hybrid. I'm struggling with exactly how hate-filled to get over this particular issue, because I do respect Australian GWM for sticking up for Australian consumers and saying, no, we must have a spare, because the battery is where the spare would be. Ergo, the other opportunity was to say, nah, spare tyre, you don't really need one of those, do you? Here's a tin of goop and a compressor, and off you go. This would, of course, not work in many regional remote kind of scenarios, and it would just be a pain in the arse even in the city at times. So they have given us a spare, so yay, and it's mounted to this plate that's bolted into the floor of the tray. The plate also wraps around and is secured to the inner wall of the right-hand guard. So it's reasonably secure, even though that doesn't feel particularly factory to me, know what I mean? So there's that. The other thing, of course, is that it's a steel rim, whereas most premium utes, at least the Triton that I've got, comes with 5 alloy wheels, an alloy wheel on the spare, like a matching alloy wheel. And I always really like that, because if you do happen to damage one of your factory alloy wheels, you've got a spare, literally. You can deploy that and maybe get an aftermarket alloy wheel to just stick where the spare is. You don't get that with this, obviously. It's a steel spare, and I think even a Pelican seemingly has endorsed my view on this, but the pragmatist in me does say, well, what else could they have done? The only practical thing they could have done was say no spare, which would suck even harder, and I have to get even more of a hate on over that. But I think, you know, for many regional users, it might be a better idea to just get some heavy-duty roof racks up there and have the spare on it, and thus not compromise the load access width-wise on your tray. Might not work so well in a city, however, because this car's already 1.9 and a bit tall. And then if you add a 265 tyre and some hardware to mount it, and you clear the shark's fin antenna up the top, that could be interesting if you forget it's up there and you just duck into the nearest underground car park, couldn't it? This is the White Hot Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra Electric Body Hair Trimmer from Manscaped. The clean design, the powerful tech, it's just daring you to swing down out of the Bronze Age and leave your ancestors behind. History has its place, of course, but hardly ever when it comes to grooming. The Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra comes with two skin-safe blade heads, a trimmer blade and a foil blade. The upgraded trimmer blade has longer, wider and rounded teeth that handle even the thickest hair effortlessly. This foil blade is the one you need for that ultra-smooth finish, which is typically such a crowd pleaser. And swapping between the blades is dead easy and so satisfying, dude. Like, this is an example of really slick industrial design. Simple to do, so positive, and it just feels right. So essentially, what you've got here is two pro-grade trimmers in the one package for the price of one. The Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra hits all the expected Manscaped benchmarks. Powerful rechargeable lithium-ion battery, high-speed electric motor, a travel lock to prevent in-bag activation, USB-C charging, and a 3-level battery indicator. There's a new LED light with not one but two colour temperatures, so a bit of personal preference there, and it will conquer even the dingiest of shower recesses, leaving you with no more patchwork grooming quilt to explain away. And it's waterproof, so you can groom in the shower where cleanup is a breeze. Plus, it comes with a 2-year warranty. Go to manscaped.com/AutoExpert now and grab yourself the white-hot Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra. Use my promo code AutoExpert and you'll get 15% off every order. That's 15% off with promo code AutoExpert at manscaped.com/AutoExpert. One of the elephants in the room under here is the location of the battery box. This is front and rear, tow bar, rear diff housing. Side to side, the battery is about there. I know you can't see that edge, but it's just out of the shot. And that means, superficially, when you look at it on fundamentals, the battery is very close to any impact that might take place from the rear, and that makes it somewhat vulnerable. Now, they have given it some significant engineering countermeasures. Above the tow bar here, you can't really see it, but there is a dirty big cross member between the two chassis rails, and it is bigger and beefier and more heavily engineered than it needs to be if its function were only to tie the two chassis rails together at the back of the car. I mean, that needs to happen, but they didn't need to make it quite that thick. It's like, I don't know, 6 or 8 millimeters thick. I can just get a finger up inside a hole that's been punched into the cross member, so it's a bit difficult to measure. But anyway, it's a beefy thing that's been heavily engineered with FEA, and I can only assume that that is because they want to resolve any crash forces into the chassis before it gets to the battery box. And there is another 4 inches or so, 100 millimeters, about that far, from the front edge of the battery box to a cross member in the tray. So hypothetically, I assume they did this in R&D as well, the brackets holding the battery box in place could shear off at some pre-engineered threshold and allow the battery to move a little bit further forward to protect itself as well. But at the end of the day, it's NMC chemistry, nickel, manganese, cobalt chemistry, which has the lowest threshold of activation for thermal runaway. So worst case scenario, big impact, battery box compromise, thermal runaway event. That's bad, okay? On the plus side, I guess the thermal runaway, if it happens, is going to be happening way back here, which is a good few metres from the passenger compartment. And when you think about it, there's a lot of EVs driving around today with the passenger compartment is on top of the battery box. So if there is a thermal runaway event following a crash, people will be sitting directly on top of the problem. So this is a good news, bad news story, having the battery out the back here, and I'd suggest whether it's good news or bad news depends on the kind of crash you have, and what a bastard that you don't ever get to choose what kind of crash you'd like to be involved in today. This is so incongruous, right? The cabin is so preposterously luxurious. It screams premium SUV, but the luxury stops right here at the rear bulkhead, you know. There's a lot of cool stuff in here, but it's very bare bones back here. Like, you've got your slidey window like a proper American super truck. The one premium feature I can see here for the tray is these factory integrated tray lights. So if the tailgate is open, the lights are on, they function really well. That's a really clever, easy to integrate feature that many other utes don't have but should. Okay, but once you come here, it's all poverty, seemingly. Like, the tailgate's great, the split thing, that's fantastic. The spray-in bed liner, 2 thumbs up on that, because those bloody plastic tub liners are so slippery, it's like Torval and Dean every time you get in the back, until it's properly scuffed up after a few months of carrying some abrasive stuff. But there's not even a hoop here to protect the glass. You know, your basic hoop with a couple of vertical bars to stop anything you've got in here that's higher than the tub from sliding forward and giving you a multi-hundred to multi-thousand-dollar problem. So that seems to be a bit of an oversight to me. And we're talking the premium ute here, right? So all the other premium utes have some kind of sports bar solution that also functions as a forward movement protection system to some degree at least. And in addition to that, roll top tonneau, like, there's no security for any of your stuff. A Ranger's got an electric roll top tonneau cover. My Triton's got one of those ones you pull it backwards and forwards, and at least your stuff is secure. And I know from bitter personal experience that this cartridge for the roll top consumes about that much of the top half of the space in your tub, and that's pretty valuable space because it's kind of forward of the rear axle. But from here back, it's like, oh no, that's a ute. We don't have to worry about premium back here. And that's an area where the establishment competition does a far better job, in my view. Because this vehicle is so different to the established competition, I spent a great deal of time climbing in and out of it in various ways. The cabin, obviously, the tray, obviously. I must have spent at least 3 hours just standing underneath it, shining a torch up its guts, having a look at what I could reverse engineer out of the production engineering and the decisions that were made, obviously, in designing it and screwing it together. Because there's a lot of engineering decision language wrapped up in fairly mundane looking components if you know what to look for. You can decompile some of those decisions and infer a lot about the choices that were made and the calibre of engineering that went into producing this vehicle. And I'd have to say, it's extremely impressive on that criteria alone. It functions really well, and it's been put together in an outstandingly professional way. Like, people have this perception of Chinese manufacturing, it's down here. This vehicle is up here in the way it's just put together. That's undeniably true. The counterbalancing point, though, is complexity. And this is a real issue, I think, for anybody who might consider owning this vehicle for the long haul, all right? Because in this ute, you've got all of the complexity of a conventional internal combustion car. You've got all of the complexity of a conventional electric car. And it has to be said that electric cars are not simpler than combustion cars. They're just complex in a different way. They've got different modes of failure, but they're at least equally complex. And over and above that, on another layer, you've got all of the complexity of the systems that have to be in place to integrate the combustion side of business with the electric side of business so that they speak to each other civilly and there's no disconnect operationally when you get behind the wheel. So this is a high level of complexity. And the reason complexity matters is because it is the enemy of reliability. I have to be very careful about what I say here because it's easy. Some people will go off and say, he said that's going to be an unreliable shitbox. That's not what I said at all. What you need to do with very complex systems, if you want reliability, is you have to invest a large amount of engineering resources into ensuring reliability. Simple systems can be made reliable really easily. Complex systems takes a lot more work to make them reliable. And the one thing I'm unable to tell you is that although I can say, hand on my heart, this is a very complex machine, I can't tell you whether or not sufficient countermeasures have been engineered in to ensure reliability over the long term. I guess in that respect, anybody who buys one and owns it is going to be inevitably something of a lab rat. Tyres are so preposterously critical to vehicle performance, dynamic performance. Cars only do three things. They only accelerate or brake or change direction. And at the end of the day, it's the rubber on the road that achieves all of that. So if you scrimp and buy something where the price was compelling, like the Double Happiness Road Gripper Pro Plus 2000 Max, probably not going to be as good as a Dunlop, Bridgestone, Goodyear, Pirelli, Continental, Toyo branded thing. And here we are with this car with its Gitti X-Ross HT71. Gitti appears to be the brand. X-Ross might be the tyre, and HT71 probably stands for highway terrain, okay? But I don't know anything about Gitti. I would be shocked if they were as good as any of those name brands. If you're going to do any off-roading, you probably want to get rid of the HT and go for an AT anyway, at least like minimum. So there's an opportunity there, and I think one of the first things I'd be doing in the upgrade domain would be ditching the Gittis. The mighty Gittis would have to go, and something that I know and trust would have to go on in their place. Now, at the risk of finding a silver lining in this fairly bleak cloud, there is a dirty big arch here at the front and the rear. Like, there's a lot of coverage over these tyres, and I just took out a plumb bob and measured it. There's 43 millimetres of lateral clearance with the tyres straight ahead at the front and 48 millimetres of lateral clearance at the rear. So if you wanted to pump up the track a little bit and make your vehicle look a bit more butch, I think there's a real opportunity there without strapping on any horrible black plastic strips or any of that nature. You'd be able to pump things up and get some more credible, potentially better performing tyres on there at exactly the same time. The ADAS sucks, or at least elements of ADAS suck in this car. And hey, it's not Robinson Crusoe, because any car that's been rated in 23, 24 or 25 will suck in a similar way. It's just overly enthusiastically giving you all these false positive warnings and other information that you simply don't need to know. I'll just give you a few examples. If you're driving in multi-lane traffic, there could be the world's biggest gap behind you and to the right, and you might decide to overtake the vehicle in front. So you indicate and start to move, and the blind spot collision warning is wop, 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 like this, because there's a car 150 metres back. Now, that's not a risk. And if you're a reasonably aware driver, like, when was the last time you nearly crashed into a car to the side? So these warnings don't provide very much benefit to anyone who's even halfway competent, and they're false alarms anyway, so they teach you to ignore them. There's a whole lot of other beeps and bongs that happen, and I haven't even been able to get to the bottom of what the hell they're warning me about, but I'm situationally aware and I can't tell that there's been a problem. So, you know, that's a bit frustrating. And also the adaptive cruise. I can't figure out how to reduce the distance between this vehicle and the vehicle in front of it in adaptive cruise mode. I think it's set at 3 suburbs away, and God knows what the reason is. So the ADAS sucks, but I don't think we need to blame just GWM for that, because they're striving to comply with a 5-star standard. The 5-star standard requires the ADAS, and the ADAS sucks. So if you're trading up from a 20-year-old Hilux or something, that's going to be a bit confronting. You're essentially looking up underneath the floor of the tray, and I want to talk about the complexity back here because it's very different to a 1995 ex-government Hilux that you want to turn into an off-road weapon. Just to get you spatially oriented, this is the leading edge of the battery box. Just here, rear differential. There's a power control system here. There's a couple of cross members, obviously, and a whole bunch of wiring and plumbing. So the wiring, there's high voltage wiring and low voltage wiring going from, there's high voltage on this side and high voltage on that side as well. You can always tell the high voltage stuff, it's orange, okay? And there's also a cooling system because batteries need a thermal management system, and there's a lot of plumbing to do with that because you need delivery and return, and it goes all the way from the back of the car to the heat exchanger right up the pointy end. And that means if you're lying awake at night thinking about all the cool accessories that you might fit to your tray, boxes and bars and racks and things of that nature, I'd be measuring 3 times and drilling once, dude, because there is so much stuff to hit when you drill through the floor. You don't want to hit a 400 volt cable. Like, that would be memorable. And you wouldn't want to nick the plumbing either for the cooling system. And there's a lot of stuff under here, and it is convoluted because the high voltage wiring, I can see some orange coming up here over the chassis and going into the PCS over here. And there's more high voltage wiring. There's at least 2 lots of high voltage wiring coming in here and another one coming in over here. So it's going to be fraught with risk if you just randomly drill a few holes for those bars you've always wanted to fit and put a few nutserts in or something to fit them, because that could end properly in tears, right? And the other thing is, for the aftermarket industry, it's going to be very difficult indeed to integrate a tray into this vehicle and maintain the operation of all of the systems that are back here. And that means if GWM releases a cab chassis variant of this vehicle, I'd be going for that. And if they've got a factory tray, I'd also be going for that, because it's kind of really not Grandpappy's Massey Ferguson back here. There's a lot of stored energy and a hell of a lot of complexity. And if you just happen to drill through into the battery box, that's on you. As much as I love the interior, and it does feel very premium indeed, the ergonomics are fantastic, there's no ability to adjust the cabin temperature via any of these direct HVAC buttons. And I mentioned this in my Love It video as well as a bit of a deficiency, but it seems glaring to me because one of the most common things you want to do is adjust the cabin temperature because, you know, your passenger complains about it being too hot or too cold or something, and you have to make these adjustments. It's very difficult to adjust the temperature by diving into a menu as you drive, obviously, but if there's a toggle in one of these buttons, it's just temperature up, temperature down, that is super simple, and you can do that half a second, eyes off the road, finger on the right button, toggle up and toggle down to your heart's content, take your eyes off momentarily to confirm that you agree with the temperature you've just set, and then you're back to 100% concentrating on driving. Whereas this menu architecture that involves a touchscreen with no haptic feedback and no physical buttons, that requires much more cognitive deficit in relation to driving the actual vehicle. You've got to take so much cognition away from the dynamic driving environment to do that, that is a real liability. And the other thing is the architectural challenge for designers with interiors such as this is it looks elegant and simple, but there are so many features and you have to decide which of those features get to be on the buttons, and they have to be the features that you need all the time, right? And generally the designer's got that really right. However, there's a blank button just here that could be just right for temperature adjustment. There's also 3 blank buttons here, and this is the top spec vehicle. So there was plenty of real estate that is currently devoted to buttons but unused, at least in our spec that could be devoted to this feature, and I think that's a real oversight back in R&D. One of the most challenging aspects of this car, for some users at least, is going to be the payload, because it's quite low. It's 685 kilos. And I get why that is, because there's a dirty big battery just down there. Batteries are heavy, and it's a zero-sum game. Everything you add detracts from the payload. And I wanted to sit here and talk about the payload because a lot of people erroneously just think about what goes in the tray when they talk about payload. But it's actually everything. It's whatever you put in the tray, sure, but it's the people and their personal effects that you put in the cabin, and it's any accessories that you fit to the vehicle as well, like a roof rack or an awning or a bull bar or a canopy or whatever it is that you fit, you know, racks and bars and things like that to carry loads. It doesn't matter. It's a zero-sum game. So let's just think about that for 1 second. Let's say you want to do a big trip. You want to tow a conservative caravan, 2,000 to 2,500 kilo caravan. Let's say 2.5. That's going to be 250 kilos on the tow ball, meaning it's part of the payload. So out of your 685, there's 250, so that's 435 left. So if you put 4 people in here and their mum and dad and 2 strapping teenagers and their personal effects, that's got to be nearly 400 kilos, right? And their personal effects. And let's say you're also going to carry some water and a fire extinguisher and a shovel and a second spare tyre. We're at 400 kilos there, right then. That means you got 35 kilos less. And we haven't got a roof rack or an awning yet. And we don't have a bull bar, and we don't have a canopy on the back or any of that other stuff. So if you're going to be doing that, if that's your application, that's going to be super challenging, dude. Whereas if you just want a more general purpose ute that you can put a trailer on to go to the landscape supply joint and come back with 2 tons of whatever, you got a couple of 100 kilos worth of download there, but bugger all else in the vehicle at that time, then great. And if sometimes you just go to Bunnings and you put some heavy stuff in the back, then that's going to be fine as well. And then other times you go camping with your family with your 400 kilos of people and personal effects and a couple of 100 kilos of shit in the back, then that's going to be fine also. But if you see up in lights, like 3.5 tons of tow capacity, well, if you put a 3.5 ton caravan or something on the back of this vehicle, you've already lost more than half of the payload because it's only 685, and you've got 335 kilos left. Mum and dad and their personal effects at 200 kilos. That's 135 kilos to go, and you haven't got second spare tyre, any accessories, recovery kit, water, fire extinguisher, blah, blah, blah. So you have to think really carefully about the heavy towing lap of Australia kind of scenario, because I'd suggest that less is more when it comes to these kinds of big expeditions. And if you expect to do it all, you know, to put the really heavy van on and load the vehicle up and take 4 people, then that's just a pipe dream, dude, and it's not going to work out well, because you'll get stopped halfway to nowhere by some rozzer on the side of the road with some scales, and they'll say, dude, you're massively overloaded. Here's your fine, and P.S. you can't leave here without making some substantial changes, and that's going to get old real fast. It would hardly be fair at this point if we didn't also discuss power out, like V2L, vehicle to load, 240 volts AC power out, which this car does. It came, when I picked it up, with this intellectually stimulating and spiritually intriguing shoebox. And I thought, how could they have possibly known about my desire for that pair of Christian Louboutin high heels? It's everything a girl could dream of. So I opened it up, didn't I? And imagine my surprise. Instead of a fine pair of shoes, I found this seeming explosion in a cable factory. Now, one end of this cable has a charging plug, and the other end has a GPO style Australian power brick with 3 outlets. When I read the fine print on the outlet side, it's 2.4 kilowatts maximum. So this is essentially the same as a power brick that you plug into a GPO at home, at least this end of it is. Like 10 amp supply only, thanks very much. It's also presumably got a breaker inside it in case you try to overload it. So this is your V2L solution, which is fair enough, I suppose, although I am told that the vehicle has 3 and a bit kilowatts of V2L capability, which is not quite 15 amps, but it's substantially more than 2.4, which is limited here. So I don't know if there's another option. I did have a properly grown-up look for a GPO-style power point in the cabin, and there is at the rear end of the center console, like accessible to the rear seat passengers, just down there in the center kind of thing, there's a blank plate that appears to me tailor-made for one of these 3, right? And I do not know why it is not there. And I would also ideally like to see a power outlet here, because if you've got off-grid cabin or something that you're building, it'd be lovely to be able to just plug in here, wouldn't it? You know, it'd also be lovely, frankly, to be able to plug into a charger and get 240 volts out at the same time, which obviously with this setup you cannot do. But anyway, the vehicle will do V2L and you'll get a substantial amount of electrical grunt out of it. And overall, I love that. But at the same time, I think it could be executed a bit better with some hardwired GPO type facilities in the vehicle itself.